Welcome to the midweek Cybersecurity Executive Briefing, brought to you by Clock Tower Technology Services and the United Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'm Brian Sulo, your virtual CISO, for the next 15 minutes. My company is Clock Tower Technology Services, and we provide IT, telecom, and information security services to businesses with 10 to 100 employees. But this isn't a sales pitch, so if you want to learn more about what we do and how we do it, we can talk later. Right now, I'm going to bring you cybersecurity news and takeaways that you can use in your business today. I'll keep the InfoSec jargon to a minimum, but if there's anything you don't understand, please ask me to clarify. I would just request that you hold your questions to the end so that we can get through all the topics in the allotted time. And just a reminder, this is being recorded and will be published. So if you have any questions you don't want disclosed, bring them up after we've stopped the recording or just connect with me later. Let's get started. Our first item comes from bleepingcomputer.com. Earlier this week, a new zero-day vulnerability was reported in Microsoft Windows and Office. A zero-day vulnerability means that the bad guys knew about it and were using it before it was discovered by the good guys. This vulnerability allows the attacker to execute commands on a victim's computer by getting the victim to open a specially crafted Word document. The good news is that a patch for this vulnerability was just released yesterday. My takeaway is that although patching is automatic with Windows 10, it's not immediate and it's not foolproof. Unless your IT team is verifying that patches are installed, they can get missed for various reasons. They may not completely eliminate the vulnerability, or they may not work at all. That actually happened a couple of months ago with a vulnerability called Print Nightmare, where Microsoft released a patch and it did nothing at all to solve the problem. Also, ActiveX controls, which are the mechanism used in this vulnerability, are a technology that was developed by Microsoft decades ago and was deprecated, meaning Microsoft gave up on the technology, in 2015. However, the ability to run ActiveX controls is still built into modern versions of Windows and Office and is on by default. Turning this off requires either modifying the Windows registry or, if you're on an Active Directory domain, deploying a group policy object. I recommend that this be done. You shouldn't have things running or have the ability to run that are unneeded. They just provide added ways for the bad guys to get in. If anyone wants to know how to do this, contact me and I can provide instructions for both means of accomplishing this. Next up, we have an article from darkreading.com. A new report from cybersecurity firm Kaspersky shows that 63% of security incidents are the result of poor patching and password management practices. This is a quote from the article. Though newly discovered vulnerabilities tend to attract a lot of attention and concern, Kaspersky found only a relatively small proportion of incidents it investigated last year involved vulnerabilities discovered in 2020. In most other instances, attackers used older vulnerabilities, including at least one from 2017 that enterprise organizations should have patched long ago. Adversaries act as businesses. They pay attention to the costs and know the most cost-efficient attacks are those that target low-hanging, easily accessible security issues, says Gleb Gritzai, head of security services at Kaspersky. A lot of victims happen to be aware of existing security issues, such as lack of security patches and bad passwords, or suspicious behavior that was not properly investigated, he says. Did they need expensive and stellar security solutions and complex security controls to prevent or detect incidents? No, just security basics to minimize attack surface, Gritzai says. My takeaway? The basics are important. Good practices beat expensive security tools more often than not. This is why I recommend becoming objectively secure. A measure of your safeguards against a proven standard is a better indicator of true security than the amount of money you're spending on security tools. The next two reports are related. First, from ThreatPost. You may have heard about this on the news. It was kind of a big deal. Apple issued an emergency fix for a flaw in iMessage that allows attackers to install software by sending a message. My takeaway? Update your iPhones, iPads, and Apple Watches now. Don't wait. Again, Apple releases patches on a regular basis, and those devices will get updated eventually, but there's no telling when that might happen unless you trigger it to happen. And next, a bad bug was discovered in Chrome that can allow attackers to run code on the victim's computer by visiting a specially crafted website. So again, update Chrome. You do that by clicking the menu button in the top right and going down to Help and then About Chrome, and it will automatically update itself at that point. So once again, Chrome will update itself at some point, but you don't want to be the last one in that line. So the real takeaway from these last two stories, though, is that in business, for cybersecurity, inventory matters. You can't secure what you don't know about. Are your employees using Apple devices to access your corporate data? Are they using Chrome on company computers? Well, if they are, that may be okay. But if you don't know, then these vulnerabilities become serious risks to your cybersecurity. Finally, a report from InfoSecurity magazine. According to cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike, it now takes intruders only 30 minutes to move from the initially compromised computer on a network to other computers on the network. Also, the attackers are less likely to utilize malware as part of the attack, making detection more a matter of monitoring for suspicious activities than particular file signatures. My takeaway? Well, this might seem like a call to increase perimeter security, beefing up your firewall, anti-malware, and anti-phishing technologies. Well, those are all good things, but the better option is to increase containment measures, including moving towards a zero trust model. Now, I don't have time here to describe what a zero trust model is, but I will talk about containment. So a strong perimeter is great, but it only takes one hole in the fence to allow attackers in. And if you can keep them contained once inside, and you have good detection measures, you can stop a bad situation from becoming a nightmare. And by contained, I mean keep them on the system that they initially got access to. Don't let them spread. The best containment measures consist of segmenting managed devices like PCs and servers from unmanaged devices like switches and printers, and ensuring that all managed devices have firewalls enabled and up-to-date endpoint security software. Now, since we have a little time, I want to bring up a couple of items from last week that I didn't get to. First up, from Krebs on Security, cybercriminals are recruiting mules from the victim's own employees. They're actually sending emails or text messages or other communications to employees, convincing them or trying to convince them to install their software, their ransomware or their backdoor programs onto company computers. And they're promising a big payout if they're successful. So we've actually seen this before from nation-state actors. So a couple of years ago, Russia tried to get a Tesla employee to implant malware into Tesla's network. But we've not seen it yet, or we've not seen it before at this level of smaller companies, and by ransomware affiliates rather than by countries. And we expect that this approach will increase since the payday for the employee is potentially so large. Excuse me. And, employee background checks can help here. But probably the bigger thing that helps is pardon me. The bigger help is least privilege administration. And that means giving people access to what they need to do their jobs, but no more. Most small businesses that I see, their default position is just give everybody access to everything. Usually other than like HR and finance. Just give everybody access to everything. Make them all administrators of computers and maybe even of the server, so that they're not hampered by not being able to have access to what they need. Well, that's great for productivity until something happens that shouldn't happen. And this is one of those things, but there are many, many problems that can occur because of that. So we recommend the least privilege administration approach. And then finally, from infosecurity.magazine.com, globally, 1/3, 37% of organizations were affected by ransomware or data breach in the last 12 months. That's a huge number. The good news is that in the US, that number is 7%. The bad news is that number is 7%. That's still a big number. You don't want to be part of the 7%. The average ransomware payment is $250,000. And that doesn't include lost productivity, lost sales, loss of reputation, and the huge cost of getting things back up and running again, whether you pay the ransom or not. You want to make sure that you're not part of that statistic. Adopt good cybersecurity policies and practices. Find someone who can guide you on a cybersecurity framework so that you can become measurably, objectively secure. Now that's all for this week. Before we get into the Q&A section, I just want to mention that the best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. If you need to run, thank you for attending, and I'll see you next week. If not, stick around and I'll answer your questions or take a deeper dive into anything that might have piqued your interest.
If somebody gets hit up with ransomware, is there other ways around it besides paying the dough?
So yeah, yes and no. I recommend that in all cases you try to avoid having to get in that situation where you have to pay a ransom. There's lots of reasons not to, including the fact that you could run afoul of federal federal laws, because it could be a payment. It could be seen as a payment to a terrorist organization.
Whoa, didn't even think of that.
Yeah, no, that's never, as far as I know, that's never actually been brought up or brought against anyone who has paid a ransom. But it is a potential. So yeah, you want to make sure, number one, you have good backups of everything. So take stock of what you're backing up. Make sure that everything you think is included is included. And that doesn't always mean just data. You want to make sure that any systems you have that are integral to your business, you have a way to continue performing that function if that system goes down, whether that means having a redundant system or it means having a manual way to do it. You want to make sure that you could actually survive that. And that's not just for ransomware. That could be because your system gets hit by lightning, or if it's a cloud system, there's some sort of an outage. Now, the thing that's more difficult to prevent against, so people have gotten wise to this, obviously, and businesses have really beefed up their backups and making sure that they have redundancy. So the newest threat from ransomware actors is they get in to the network. They don't immediately deploy the ransomware. They first steal the data. So it's called exfiltration. They pull the data out of the network. They leave a copy, but they're making a copy of proprietary data, customer data, consumer data, whatever, what have you. Then they deploy the ransomware. Then the threat is, okay, either you pay us or we, leave your files encrypted and you can't use them. And oh, by the way, if you decide to just restore from backup and not pay us, we're going to release your proprietary data that we stole either publicly, or we're going to sell it to the highest bidder. And that can be, you can get in trouble that way, due to privacy regulations. You're reputation would be, shot. And there's not a whole lot you can do about that once they've stolen the data. It's out of your control. So, yeah, staying on the other side of this whole mess is really
Yes.
the best
Okay.
policy.
Well, Brian, thanks for this week. And we will look forward to seeing you next week. Hopefully, some folks can talk a little bit more and we can get a bigger audience. But thank you.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to it. See you next week.
All right.